Morning. I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Education Finance Committee to order. Today is Thursday, November 21st. Typically, the first thing we would start with at this first meeting after the election cycle is a election of the committee chairperson. It's a special meeting. We did not put it on the agenda, and we cannot amend the agenda of a special meeting. So for that reason, John Cini will continue to serve as chair of the Finance Committee through until our next Finance Committee, and then we need to elect the chair, and that will be in about a month. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to John to start with the review of the October 2024 financial report.
I'll just, oh, okay, we'll switch. Good morning and welcome, Joanna, to the Finance Committee subcommittee. So the next meeting is January 16th. So that's when we'll be doing the election of the Finance Subcommittee. So the first item on this agenda is review of the October 2024 financial report. Rich.
So this is the financial report through October. Through October, we are forecasting a slight deficit of $7,749. This is a change of $9,808 from the previous month. Going over the changes, there is a deficit in consult services and special education for $135,100. These are for services for students for both behavior and unilateral services. We have a contracted speech deficit for vacant SLP for $54,127. We did discuss this in a previous meeting. There is a position in the budget that has not yet been filled, and so it's being backfilled by contracted services. Contracted OT, slight deficit of $2,000. Again, these were being backfilled while the district OTs were vacant. Those are all filled as well. We have a small positive balance in science equipment for microscopes that came in slightly under budget. We did get a workers' comp reimbursement for $775. We have some savings in payroll taxes due to the vacancies. A slight increase in salary savings of $13,433. We have another maintenance employee on the new salary schedule, and that is a savings of $29,015. We have some step and level savings for a variety of clubs across all 7 schools for $33,753. We have some savings in the building subs account across the 7 schools for $49,400. Some of that is related to turnover, and some of that is related to start date of the building subs. And then we have salary savings associated with that vacant SLP that I mentioned earlier for $52,627. Overall, the general education RCs are a positive $140,079. The special education RCs are a deficit of $147,828. Just going through the individual RCs. RC1, we do have some savings of $3,324 in the theater and music stipend account. And again, this is due to step and level savings. Student government stipends show a positive balance of $934, and that is due to savings in step and level as well. And then clubs and councils shows a positive balance of $4,549 due to step and level savings in debate, senior internship, and assistant Blue Wave News. In RC3, again, clubs and councils for theater and music show a positive balance of $2,557, and that is due to step and level savings. Honor stipend shows a positive balance of $1,185, again, due to step and level savings. And then student interest club shows a positive balance of $1,640 due to step and level savings in both robotics and UN. In Hindley, we do have a positive balance in building subs of $5,000 due to the late start and some of the building subs being started. And then clubs and council shows a positive balance of $3,151 due to step and level savings in robotics and the literary club. Homes also has a savings of $12,500 in the building subs due to turnover and a late start for some building subs, and clubs and councils has a small positive balance of $2,318 due to step and level savings in student council and literary club. In Oxbridge, building sub shows a positive balance of $19,000 due to a late start and turnover in 1 unfilled building sub currently. Clubs and councils shows a positive balance of $7,465. Safety Patrol, Student Council, and Enrichment Club are currently not running at Oxbridge. Royal, building sub shows a positive balance of $9,400 due to turnover and late start of building sub. And clubs and councils has a small balance of $1,626 due to step and level savings in robotics. And then Tokenique, again, building subs has a slight positive balance of 3,500 for the same reason, turnover and late start of building subs. And then clubs and councils has step and level savings of $3,700 in robotics, safety patrol, student council, and literary club. As I mentioned before, in RC 12, we have a new carpenter and he is on the new salary schedule, and that's a savings of just over 29,000. In RC 13 music, we do have step and level savings for $1,100. Moving to RC 24, the deficit I mentioned earlier, consultant services is deficit of 135,100, and that is due to services for behavioral services for students and unilateral services. And then in RC 25, workers' comp, as I mentioned, we did get a small reimbursement of $775 from Colonel.
Any questions? Joanne?
In the unilateral services for students and speech behaviors, I'm familiar with the term unilateral when a parent pulls a kid out. What does it mean in this situation?
So in this situation, the student's not pulled out of district. They came to a unilateral agreement between Shirley's department and the parents to provide a certain amount of services, and with, specific organization, and that's the payment here. So.
Thank you.
Greg?
Just a quick, when you look through the list, just stood out to me that there's kind of two categories that were recurring throughout. One was the clubs and councils, and the other was substitute teachers. Just any color you can provide on those two?
Sure. So when we budget for clubs and councils, we assume the person who ran it last year is going to run it again. And so the way the teacher's contract works is they're at a certain step and level, just like you would for your normal salary. If they're not at that max level, they'll move up a level. In the case here, we had a number of clubs turn over and who the advisor is. So when they turn over, you go back to level one. And so just like you might have turnover savings if a teacher left the district and you replaced them at a smaller level, you're getting that on the club level, which is at obviously a much smaller amount. In terms of the building subs, if you recall in this year's budget, we did add a third building sub to each of the elementary schools and then a fourth at Oxford because of the size. Some of them didn't start right when school started. And so it's the daily rate for those days that hadn't happened. In some cases, the building sub ended up becoming like a long-term sub because we have the leave of absence and that created savings in the building sub account. In some instances, the building sub was able to leave the district and get a full-time teaching position somewhere else. Then that obviously also creates some savings.
Anybody else? Okay, move on to transfers.
So there are three transfers recommended for approval. The first is to cover the $135,100 deficit in consultant services and special education. We are recommending taking savings from salary savings for a groundskeeper, salary savings for an assistant principal who was on maternity leave, that small amount of science equipment savings that I mentioned, salary savings from SSO that had a leave of absence, all the savings that I had mentioned for building substitutes and clubs and councils, that small reimbursement for workers' comp, the savings from the new salary schedule for the carpenter, and then some small step and level savings at the secondary level in clubs and councils. The second transfer is something we had mentioned at the previous meeting. Now that all the district OTs are filled, we are recommending taking the salary savings from those positions to move to contracted services, which was used to backfill those positions while they were vacant. And then the third transfer is something similar. We have a vacant SLP, and so that's being backfilled by contracted services. So taking the salary savings from that vacant SLP and moving it into contracted speech.
Any questions regarding the transfers? See no questions. I just looking for guidance and recommending it to the board. I would recommend that we go ahead with these transfers. Do you get a consensus around that? See a consensus. So I'll report back to the board. We have a consensus for the approve the transfers. Go ahead.
Just one question on the page of the adjustments and reconciliation detail. There were two, I was under the impression that most of these items are under a certain dollar amount, but there were some that tuition public and non-public was like $74,000. And then there was the consultant services, $58,000. And I thought normally those would come to the board to be voted on as a transfer, but I wasn't sure what.
No, so the policy is that it has to stay within broad category. So it's not a dollar threshold. So for example, you can move salaries to salaries, you can move supplies to supplies, but when it crosses a broad category. So for example, like this, if we take salaries and move it to contracted services, that's a board transfer. So in the case of like the tuition, for example, we had a student that was anticipated to be a non-public placement. It ended up being a public placement. And so it's just crossing those lines, but in the same,
And the consultant services, because it was,
within the same category of other professional services.
oh, okay, I understand. Okay, thank you.
Good question, though. Anybody else? Okay, so then we'll go to the fiscal year 26 pro forma budget.
I had a question about granted.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, no, sorry. Sometimes we go through them, so go ahead.
Just the Title IV grant. We had it the last 2 months, but now it's not there anymore. Is that just?
So it was, the state let us know it was tied to Title I, and because we lost Title I, we did lose Title IV as well. And so that's a loss of about $10,000.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the fiscal year 26 pro forma budget. I see, what is this updated?
So that is the one we sent out last night.
Okay, so here, so last night, and is this going to be, is this separate one going to be posted?
That will be posted after the meeting. Yep.
Okay. So, in line with Jill, you have one?
I do, thank you for.
Okay.
What's that? Oh, this-
Okay, so what we're looking at, which will be posted later today, is an update to the pro forma spreadsheet that we've been discussing, I guess, for the last few months in terms of trying to understand the fiscal year 26 budget and what the primary drivers are. So Rich has created an update with a spreadsheet looking back at the October pro forma and going through some updates and creating an adjusted pro forma for, I guess, where we are in mid-November. So Rich, could you walk through the spreadsheet?
Sure. So the pro forma that we shared in October was a total increase of 6.5 million, about 5.5% on the budget. Since then, there's been a few changes. First, anticipated tuition is expected to go up in special education by $982,000. These are both settlements and IEP placements that have been more firmed up and change of placements. Contracted services relates largely to the transfer that was just recommended. Elementary enrollment will be down based on the new demography report that came out to the board last board meeting. And so it's a net reduction of 1 teacher. However, we had originally thought it was going to be an increase of 1 teacher. So what you're seeing here is a swing of 2 teachers, the one that we thought we would be above and beyond, and then minus 1 from the current year. The right to read grant had a placeholder of $650,000. It's likely that Dr. Fedigan will recommend moving K3 only as opposed to K5. And so that is a reduction of 431,000 off that amount. So the new amount would be 218,000. We did include in here utilities as we've gotten more information. The town did lock in the supplier rate for electricity. And as most people have seen in their own home, electric costs are going significantly up. The supplier rate that was locked in is about 30% more than anticipated. And so we are expecting a significant increase in the cost of electricity going into next year. Heat, we did lock in at a lower rate than anticipated, and that's a small savings. That's largely oil, which is a couple of schools. And then water, sewer, pretty nominal. And so the changes are 707,000. So that gets you to just under 7.3 million or 6.08%.
Okay, so just to be clear, the 6.1%, basically rounded up, is without any incremental programs.
Correct. So it's what you have this year effectively rolled over next year for changes in your collective bargaining unit agreements, health insurance, the deferrals from the current year's budget into next year, and then changes in special education.
So that, you had the 6.5 or 6.6 million plus 700,000, we're getting the $7.3 million. 6.1% increase that we're looking at, as I call it, baked in pro forma. Okay, and then there's some adjustments on potential new initiatives, if you will.
Sure. So there's no change in the facility condition study. Teen Talk at the middle school, which was previously grant funded, we did get updated pricing from Kids in Crisis for next year, and it is almost $8,000 more than anticipated. The expansion of EduPlanet for the software related pieces is slightly less, so it'll be about just under $11,000. Play-based learning, well, the total 50,000 is still expected to be the number. The incremental cost is $39,000. That's really the materials and items related to play-based learning, whereas the difference of the 11 is curriculum writing. That's essentially just repurposed money from the current budget. The website redesign, there was a discussion about adding board docs to that, and so that's the extra $12,000. We did talk, while PLCs are not finalized, if it is a K-12 option, the high end of what you would be looking at is another 297,000 or 516 in total. The transition program, originally we were thinking 6 students, it's a potential of 3 students. So with less students, the cost is slightly less, and that's a reduction of 211,000. So the net changes in those 7 initiatives are about $80,000 to the higher end. So that's about 1.1%. And so the 6.08 plus the changes in the initiatives of 1.1 gets you just under 7.2.
Rich,
Sorry.
one question. The total, you said 7.2, it actually would be, the new total would be 8.6.
Oh, I meant 7.2%.
Okay,
Yep.
okay.
Yes.
And I did have a question, just.
Well, let's just, sorry, let me just think, because that's why I paused. I was looking, so just to be clear, the fiscal year pro forma, what's already baked in plus potential new initiatives. The original forecast was 7.8. Now we're looking at 8.6. That's an increase of just shy of 800,000, 788,000, representing 7.2%. Okay, thank you. Go.
Okay, a couple of questions just on transition program. I couldn't keep up with your, just tell me again, what made that change?
Sure. So we were anticipating more students initially when it was first brought forward. And so we did discuss, I think at a previous board meeting, it's likely to be 3 if it moves forward. And so the reduction in students created that reduction in cost because you're not going to have as many paraprofessionals as it's.
Okay, and then also in the special education versus the prior pro forma that we had seen, were these new students to district, or was this, or are there, how many students is this, or is this something that we?
So they're not new placements, or new students to districts. They're more expensive placements than were originally anticipated.
But the previous placements were in the pro forma we had seen previously, it's just that they ended up changing to be more expensive.
So they haven't necessarily been outplaced yet.
Okay,
But there was basically a placeholder for what it was anticipated to be, and that's changed.
okay.
Can I ask
Sorry, go
about
ahead.
that further?
Yeah, absolutely.
My understanding is the way things work is takes a long time to get from initial referral to outplacement. But this just came up in the span of a month. Is there any way, if this happens again in the future, that we can make sure we have like a longer line vision on it?
So we would have to work with Shirley on that. So obviously my office is not involved with like the PPT process and all of that. And so usually once a month we'll get updates, but it's usually more when it's kind of like firmed up.
Do you have anything else to add?
Well, other than we monitor closely and we try and keep on top of it, like to give you the latest and most accurate information to it. I think it's a discussion that we can continue certainly on that Tuesday evening with the special education. But yes, we're giving you as much as an accurate information as we can, as quickly as we can to the board.
Okay.
I just have a few questions. One, does this reflect the new grant situation that was in the latest update earlier
Yes.
with respect to fund, what is it, 1 for?
So Title I is in here. You'll see under grant compression, the Title I funding loss.
Okay.
It's like the 3rd or 4th subsection. Title IV is a $10,000 loss, and we typically spend about 5 and then carry over the balance. So that's not really a material impact.
And what about the right to read?
So right to read expires December 30th. And it's all based on materials for like the pilot program. And so we weren't anticipating that to continue. And it's not intended to continue.
I thought that I saw there was $145,000.
Oh, that's the actual program. So the right to read where we see the 610,000 or $650,000, there's a reduction based on the anticipated program that'll be selected.
So the 145K that was, it says the district was awarded 145K related to right to read for decodables. Is that
So that's,
something else?
so
Totally
that
different?
is the grant that we received this year that expires December 30th. And that's intended to purchase like pilot materials. So as districts decide essentially what program they're going to implement in the following year, you're using that grant to purchase those pilot materials, but it's not anticipated to increase. And so when the board and Dr. Fedigan decide on what program eventually they're going to pick, that's what you see here as the original 650 down to the 280.
So how should the cost of the program itself, is that
That's the,
650 or is like, how
So
should we
it's
think
the-
about that?
so it was 650 placeholder and now the program would be 218
Okay.
as a K3 program.
Okay. And then electric that went up so much. You said that it was a big increase. Is that just Eversource? I know that for our residential, there's this
Correct.
new public
So it's
category that went
So
from,
it's primarily
5% to
Eversource, and
30.
so the Board of Ed locks in heat, propane, and diesel. The town locks in electric. So the town locked in a supplier rate. It was about 30% higher than what the current supplier rate is for this year, and that's largely because electric rates are going significantly up, both on the residential side and the commercial side. And so we are going to see a significant increase in the cost.
but so on the residential side, the reason the rates went up is because they created a new category called public
Correct.
benefits, which they basically just subsidized people who are not paying their utility bills by other people. Are we now subject to that same issue?
Yes.
Okay. Should we be pushing back on that somehow? Is that?
If it's possible.
Dr. Tracy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, well, it's a good point. We'll shoot an email.
They just
to Tracy.
magically moved it from 5 to 30%.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm well aware. too.
I saw it on mine and I was like, this is nuts.
That's a good point.
There may well be on this also just a couple adjustments even for, excuse me, even for Tuesday evening. Like, we may talk about the team talk as flag a wee little bit of how we may present that for consideration to the board as an example. I'll just use that one as an example. I don't want to go through these, they're all budget items, but we can talk about them Tuesday. But I would propose that the board consider paying 50% of that. If we don't get the 50% through other grants, we don't do it. I mean, there's an example. I don't want to go into all, but we may even make some adjustments there. There will be adjustments to the PLC. The model that will be presented to the board will be that particular level of adjustment there.
And then my last question was just, are there areas that either we, finance committee, the board, or you guys are already exploring as areas of efficiencies? I know it's early in the process, but it's never too early to get started thinking about those things.
We have reviewed as much of it, things from consultancy services. We've done a lot of efficiencies over the years from transportation and otherwise. So I'm going to say that it's been a particular struggle this year. So we'll identify the efficiencies that we can. We've had those discussions. I'd rather find efficiencies before the event, before the process. If anybody has any ideas, I would like to do that. But it just depends on the eye of the beholder what an efficiency is. Because an efficiency to one person might be a category of personnel or otherwise, and to others it might be a function of transportation or services or otherwise. So we certainly have gone through that process. I should fully expect us to.
So it's a good, well, are there any specific questions on the spreadsheet? Because I do want to talk, delve a little deeper into what Greg's question is and what we're going to be doing Tuesday night, but
Just one more question, just on the right to read with the total now that you're projecting 218,000. Is that assuming that we would buy the entire resource, or is this just a part that we could do just to augment? I'm just trying to understand what.
Either or, that decision has not been made. Actually, that full team is meeting all day today as the continuation of the process, but that will be ultimately determined between Dr. Fettigan and the board as we make that recommendation. But it'll either be the full packet for K-3 or it will be a continuum to the packet or to what we're currently doing. I mean, we'll be changing in some capacity. I think that's on the table, but that remains to be determined. And we have had follow-up discussions. the chair here of the finance committee, Mr. Shinny, was at the Captain's Cave Convention where we talked to the state directly, about where we are, what we've done, what is possible, so on and so forth. So anyway, it's either everything or.
But the 218 represents K to 3 into.
Correct, yes.
To
Yep.
read.
Should the right to read line, I'm just, it's more optics, than anything else, be at the bottom, like
It
the bottom
could be,
section?
because you could say, we're not doing it and we're not spending
Yeah,
anything.
yeah,
So
right
if
now
you
we're
want
not
to,
doing it,
if you
so-
want to consider that as that's not necessarily like a pro forma thing that, well, it's a legal thing, but we can, if we want to bring it out, that's a board, like,
But the
Correct.
board has to vote on it for it to
Correct.
be into the budget. If the vote, if there's no positive vote, then it's not.
That's
which is
true.
the same as everything that's down below.
That's true,
Yeah.
that's true, Greg, that's true.
That's, I don't know, I actually think that's a good idea. Why don't we move that to an initiative, even though it's kind of, it's mandated. Yeah, it's still an initiative. Yep. Because isn't that play-based learning kind of falls in that category, right?
Yes,
Okay, so yes,
slightly different, but
I like
yes.
that. Yes. Everybody, does that make sense, everybody? Okay. Yeah, if you could just, before you publish this, if you could update that.
Just
Sorry.
one question. So it just based on the Board of Finance was talking about core expenditures and included mandates as part of that core. Isn't this considered a mandate?
Yeah, so maybe can you put the mandates together, if you will, down at the bottom? So it's almost like, right? So, we have limited wiggle room. To Alan's point, I was standing right next to him when he was talking to the representative of the State Department of Education, and there is not a lot of coherent feedback in terms of what we're doing. So I feel his pain. I feel Amy's pain, everybody else on this initiative. My eyes glazed over, seriously, when Alan was saying, well, if we do this, this, and this, are we making headway? And the answer was like, keep going where you're going, and then we'll provide feedback. So like, make a decision. It was, as I told Alan, a lot different than what I deal with in the office every day. So, I support their commentary that there is virtually no feedback coming back from the state in terms of the initiatives that we've already taken. So have a little sympathy for these guys when we do discuss this in more detail, please. Okay. So yeah, Rich, if you can just kind of group the mandated in the bottom category, maybe make a sub number of mandates and then.
Yeah, we can make a separate
Yeah, and
one.
then the rest of the other new initiatives. Go ahead, Joan.
Just with elementary enrollment, I went back to the demographer's report to try and find where are the classrooms or which schools or grades are we losing teachers? Not losing, but is the,
Sections.
thank you.
Yeah.
Sections, yep. So it's across a bunch of them. Royal is the only school that stays exactly the same. Bring it up real quick.
You're using the medium, right?
We use the medium, yes. So Hinley will actually go up one section. Holmes will go down one section. Oxbridge will go down one section. Royal will stay the same. And then, I'm sorry, Tokenique will stay the same, but a shift from 4th and 5th grade. So it's a net of 1.
And you were anticipating.
So originally, we're anticipating 1 more.
Yeah.
Than we currently have. And so what this reflects is a shift of 2, because we're taking that 1 anticipated increase out plus the reduction.
A net reduction in -2. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on this sheet? And then we'll just kind of touch upon what I think the process is going to be on Tuesday night. Jill, anything or?
Nothing more on the sheet.
Okay, Joanne, so Greg kind of delved on, I guess taking a step back, there were 4 of us that attended the Board of Finance meeting on Tuesday night. They gave broad taxation guidance in terms of, what the impact of the 2 operating boards and some other items would be on taxpayers in terms of budgetary increases. And without giving, in my interpretation, specific guidance, there was a, well-defined box between 3% and 4% in terms of operating budget, so that the taxation rates stay within what they deem, and as the fiscal authority, that's their purview, what they deem as an acceptable tax increase for taxpayers. We all kind of have personal opinions around that, but as we learned last year, You know, the process can get messy when we go in with one view of, you know, fiscal strategy and they come back and give a reduced allocation, budget allocation. So on Tuesday night, and again, I think it's definitely necessary for a full board discussion in light of the Board of Finance's discussion. I think it's going to be pretty important that we come in with a view whether or not we give the superintendent some guidance before he starts his budget process in terms of where we think an acceptable level might be. And it doesn't have to be all quantitative, certainly qualitative. In previous years, we said, let's hold back on the new initiatives and that sort of thing. So that's more of a qualitative than quantitative, you know, hit this number. But I would encourage, especially the members of this subcommittee to, if you haven't watched it, watch the discussion, review the materials again, and come back with a view. And again, we all can have philosophical views about, you know, what the roles of certain boards are and what they should or should not be doing. But I think given last year's increase and the friction it caused, you know, not only amongst this board, but amongst the board, the discussion in the community, the Teachers Association, even some administrators, and most importantly, the huge amount of work it caused administration to basically go through two budget processes. I think it would behoove us to think about some ways of getting Alan some guidance or some guardrails or something, so he can go in with figuring out and prioritize his initiatives. And you know, and to Greg's point, it's going to be incredibly important to maybe find efficiencies. Now, I will say, and I've used this term before, there's no easy honeypot to go to this year. I mean, and what hopefully Rich by Tuesday night will have outlined, you know, what new initiatives that we've added over the last 5 years or so, and then also what efficiencies that we've employed along the way. And, you know, I keep saying, you know, we've already gotten, I think, the easy areas of efficiencies out there. And the perfect example is budget control. I think when I first joined this board, we have 4 sections. Now we have 0. And what was that? What was originally budget control? Like $650,000, if not more.
Yeah, around a half.
Yeah. So, you know, that was easy, right? That's $500,000, but that's not there anymore. We did you know, huge savings, operating savings on the busing. You know, that's no longer available without finding a parking lot and that sort of thing in a couple of years. So I don't want to dwell on it too much, but really over the next, what do we have, 4 or 5 days? I would encourage, especially this subcommittee members, to really think about how we want to deliver as a board some sort of commentary to Alan and to Rich in terms of how they want to come in to this budget season, so we can avoid maybe some of the friction that was created last year. So I don't know if anybody else has commentary or if I missed anything, Jill.
No.
You have any?
Uh,
I don't know if you've had a chance to watch that yet either.
Not in full, I haven't yet.
Okay. So I would encourage
But-
you to watch
well,
it.
Of course I'm gonna watch it. I mean, I guess with these initiatives, right? If the board wants to take a position on no new initiatives or consideration of some, that may be a consideration to take at this particular point, because I just don't want to spend the time reducing a lot of stuff, which would probably, it's going to impact this particular percentage here. We're going to impact programs no matter what we say, or personnel or other.
You just pointed, just for the record, the 6.08 too.
Correct, yes.
Not the 7.2.
Not the 7.2. So that is going to require some very difficult decisions. There are no, that, and I can just share that right. That's going to require, that's not a trying to be inflammatory. I would never try to be inflammatory, right? That is going to require some difficult choices to make. If I have to make more difficult choices to get some of these other things in, like that at some level I feel is that they're important or otherwise, then that's going to put us back into that same sort of situation where, okay, well, now we have got other constituents, other areas, address other areas, perhaps needlessly, that would be rolled back again. So it might be helpful to decide, do we have any consideration to do these and have a discussion on Tuesday night about, like,
That's good feedback. I appreciate
I
it.
might actually just like suggest one possibility might be that I decide to say to the board on Tuesday, perhaps we don't do these because like it's going to be significantly impactful, and given what we have to do, it just might be very difficult to do that, to get to the number. It's going to be very difficult to do that, to get the number that's there.
So, thanks for those comments. I mean, and again, if you go back to the memo that, that was issued on October 22nd in regards to the pro forma forecast, and where Rich gives a lot of detail behind the numbers, but we have that sensitivity analysis in there too. And again, and these numbers probably change just a bit, but yeah, every 25 basis points, 0.25% represents $300,000 out of the budget. So, multiply that by 4, every 1 percentage point represents basically 1.2 million. Okay. And so when you look at, again, I'm not suggesting anything, I'm just doing some scenario analyses, if you will. You're looking at a 6.1% increase to get that back down to that 4% range. We're looking $2.5 million without any new initiatives. Okay. So I outline that because we're really challenged. And, kind of setting expectations in the community and amongst our board members. So,
Yeah, and the only comment, I totally agree. And I did watch the finance meeting, so I saw the guidance and the little box thing and all that. So I agree with the approach. I think that like we should be looking at like what are the biggest dollar drivers of the increase? Like that's got to be, because if we go and we try to attack some of these little things, like I know we've looked at like sports just as an example, like you could wipe out all the sports and we won't even be halfway there. So we have to look at the big ticket items, otherwise it's not going to move the needle.
yeah. And I think what we've also asked Rich to do is again, look at the new and look at what we've added over the last 5 years. For instance, security, it's a big item. Additional administrators, the mental health initiatives that we've added, just to put perspective in how that we built. Again, I'm not being critical of what this board has done, and a lot has been in reaction to, community desires. But I want to better understand, and this is not pointing the fingers at the board, the administration, but what's built this. Also, what initiatives that we've tried to do to offset it. And then we could just get a view of how this is built up. But I will say, one of the biggest, and this is not scapegoating the contract, that was part of the negotiations, let's be clear, very clear. But this was a very expensive contract, and rightfully so because of the turnover. But Greg, I think you pointed out either at one of the last meetings, like, if we're increasing compensation amongst our administrators, let's just say staff across the board, there's at some of the greatest rates for very good reason. Some of the offset is FTEs, in order to manage that total expense. And again, I'm not warning on layoffs or anything like that. I just, calling out what the biggest drivers are, and, over 65% of the drivers are salaries and benefits. Okay. So not a lot of leftover room around this. So.
I don't want to get over our skis. I feel like we're talking about things that haven't been discussed at the whole table. I know no one here really wants to back into a number. We all understand the constraints. But again, I do think sometimes saying maybe this will be hit or that'll be hit is a little ahead of the game. And I'd really like to wait to a full board discussion on Tuesday to really dive into those things.
Absolutely. So.
And I would also appreciate the opportunity which the board would give me. I know that, and that's part of it. To actually, even though I'm suggesting one thing potentially, is to give you some of the priorities that would have the district. And so, like, people have done a lot of work on some of these, and some of them I would have a higher priority on them than perhaps others. That may be the judgment call and so on, but I think it merits at least that discussion.
Absolutely. And same thing on the efficiencies. Like if we do have to reduce, expenses in areas, what would be the first thing that you do? And again, some of these might have to do with policies. I mean, I'll throw it out there. I mean, you might have to do with classroom policy. Again, I'm not advocating for anything, but I just want to set the expectation straight that these are some of going to be the discussions we're going to actually have to have.
And I think that putting a lot of those ideas, whether they're real or not, onto the table sooner rather than later, so that the board can have open conversations about them and give guidance is better.
Yeah, and your priority list is really
The
important.
sensitivity to that is just, I know that.
I understand.
repeat myself. If I take let's say it impacts personnel directly or indirectly, or student programs. You basically started the budget process like right now, publicly put it on the table, and what we'll be dealing with will be feedback on that, culture issues on that, whether they're real, whether they're not, uncertainty for people much earlier, nothing much earlier, but earlier in the process, without even being able to really speak to it because the budget hasn't been presented properly yet. So have to be very sensitive to that.
Yep. And we're gonna have to communicate clearly and set expectations.
How, I guess like maybe it's a question for our subcommittee, like how do we deal with that? If we can't put stuff out in the public, like how do we, is there an alternative path?
I mean, the short answer is you have to wait until the superintendent presents his budget. I mean, that's typically what, but I understand why you want to get a sense, but just, I mean, that's.
So Alan is working on how one might go about it, but we've asked him to take a look at least giving us some sense of the universe of what might be possible under a categorization that might be something like, tier 1 would be no impact to students, relatively easy to accomplish at X amount. That's their ballpark or X range. Tier 2 might be minimal impact to students or actually educationally worth the trade-off. That might be tier 2. And tier 3 would be, this would be our next set, but maybe but educationally more impactful. And that would be the range. So it gives the board some sense before giving any sort of guidance of what the universe of potential efficiencies would be, with the understanding that we're somewhat limited without knowing what the content of those is. It's not, there's a limitation because we're a public body. But I think the board at least needs some information in order to provide guidance, so that the inputs that we have so far are the pro forma budget, the capital plan, the information from the Board of Finance. But in order for us to come up with any sort of mathematical calculation, we have the puts, but you have to have some sense of the takes.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying earlier in terms of like understanding what are some of the services that we've effectively added over the last 5 years, like that's going to be really important to know, because if we've just been adding services, it means like if we compare versus not last year, but 5 years ago, maybe we're still in a way better place by not having all those services. I don't know what they are, but let's figure out what they are so we can make a decision.
Yeah, and I think one of the comments, we have to have open minds, and even if we implemented something 2 or 3 years ago, allow that to be on the table, not just, no, we did that 2 years ago. So like open minds and work collaboratively, respectfully, understanding that we, I think Jill made this point brilliantly. We still have control of our budget, but it's within a certain allocation. So, take that responsibility and prioritize, especially given the administration's priorities, and really, take that into consideration and trust that their priorities are aligned with our educational goals and objectives. So, a lot more to come on Tuesday night. Should be interesting. Anything else, folks?
Me.
Okay, Rich, we covered everything you wanted to cover on the pro forma. Thanks for the comments. Any public comment?
Good morning. If anybody in person or online would like to participate in public comment, please approach the podium or use the raised hand icon and wait to be recognized. Once recognized, please state your name and address for the record, and note that you will have up to 3 minutes to comment. We have no raised hands at this time.
And there's no in the room because Joanna used to be the only person in the room. So, again, welcome to the Finance Board, right into the fire, or subcommittee, I should say. Thanks, everybody. Can I get a motion to adjourn? All in favor? That's